Right. Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. And I just want to put the balance a bit right about Athens. I'm delighted to be here in this fine country, in this fine city with such superb history. Now, in October last year, we launched the cost document for the disorders of the brain in the European Parliament. And as you can see, nearly 800 billion euros was spent on just 19 groups of brain diseases. It's an enormous amount of money. It's more than that is spent on cancer, plus diabetes, plus cardiovascular. And it's a situation, really, that we cannot go on, whichever country we are in Europe. The important thing is that we divided this up. Where are these costs hitting? Of course, we can always measure the hospitals, the cost of their care there, but also now the social services, and most importantly, on the families who are taking the whole brunt of this caring system. And you can see there, and if we split it again into neurological and mental health costs, you can see the enormous role that society plays in this cost. Now, our world is living longer, and we should celebrate that. It's an incredible achievement that mankind has made. I don't think any other animal on this planet has achieved it. It's a wonderful thing. In the city that I come from, London, the United Kingdom, last century, a man's expectation of life was 42 years. It's now 78. For women, it's over 80. This little girl, born in Japan, 50-50 chance to live to 100 years. What a fantastic achievement. And that takes us into the age of the old. And as this wonderful quote from Peter Peterson says, "The world stands on the threshold of a social transformation, even a revolution, with few parallels in humanity's past. Perhaps 2/3 of all the people who have ever reached the age of 65 since the world began are on this planet now." Now, of course, with all achievements, it brings challenges. The longer we live, the more chronic illnesses we will acquire. More stroke, more Alzheimer's, more cancers, more rheumatoid, more everything the longer we live. That's the challenge, and we have to rise to that. But there's something else going on which is also extremely important, and that's the changing role of women. Women have always been perceived as the carers in the family. Now, if we go back 100 years, terrible wars in Europe, millions of men died. And the result was that the women had not enough men to marry. And those unmarried women, those cousins, those aunts, were part of the family structure. So when anybody was ill, they took care of them. And that care was freely, lovingly given. Now, nothing could be further from the truth today. We've got a falling birth rate right across Europe. We've got wonderful career opportunities for women. Look at some of you here. Wonderful. And we celebrate that. But it is a difference in the structure of our families. And you can see here, in the 1920s, a couple already in their 80s had 44 female relatives alive, 14 of them not going out to work. Whereas in 2000, a couple only in mid-70s have only 13 female relatives alive and only 3 not going out to work. I do assure you there's no aspersions to women, nothing about their caring. It's the change of structure. But there's also something else going on. And this is from the figures from Panos Kanavos at the London School of Economics. Apparently there is an economic rule that you need 6 young, tax-paying adults to support 1 elderly pensioner. Look where we are in Europe, all of us, well below. In my country, we're down to 3.6, and you're not on there. I don't know, I'll have to do something about that, but you can see that right across Europe, that we're all below that very, very important threshold. The longer we live, the more illnesses we acquire. So for all of you young people in the audience, you've got a lot to look forward to, because by the time you're 65, you will have at least 3 illnesses moving on you. Always remember, good health is just an incomplete diagnosis. So, as you age, you will have comorbidity, and that means polypharmacy. That's another big challenge. We've got migration across Europe, the likes we've never seen before. People arriving into a country and they have to accept what is on offer. So in my country, speech therapy doesn't do much good to the Indians who don't speak English. Or dietary advice won't help perhaps the Pakistani population who don't eat the same foods. So all of this is another challenge. They're dissatisfied with what they get, and we're wasting resources because they're not more focused. Time with a doctor across Europe, 12 minutes. 12 minutes for these very complicated illnesses and these very complicated medicinal programs. Access to medication across Europe is very uneven. Some countries have all the medication and full reimbursement. Others have medication and no reimbursement. And some of our European colleagues have nothing. Counterfeits, they're increasing tremendously. And yet more and more people are ordering some of their medicines online. We did a small experiment in London where we asked one of the secretaries to order up 90 medicines, all requiring a prescription. She was never asked for the prescription once, and when they arrived, they were opened in front of the pharmacologists. 62 of the 90 were counterfeit. And here's a picture of one of the workshops of some of the countries producing these counterfeit medicines. Now that landscape I've painted is common to all of the European countries. That's our background, wherever we come from, and it's a big challenge. So what's our way forward? How are we going to get out of this? Partnership, coming out of the silos, working together. Trust, we've got to build it. Transparency is not enough, it's trust. Good communication, it's vital. And innovation, new ideas, a new way forward. Let's look at some of these challenges. We're a society that wants instant results. You want money, you go to the hole in the wall, tap in your numbers, you've got your money. Instant food, instant drink, instant everything. What are we doing about prevention? Not a great deal. There's not going to be one pill that's going to fix all of this. We've got to have some societal responsibility. Not everything can be prevented. But let's try to make sure that by saving the money on what we can prevent goes to the proper people who need the money spent for their illnesses when they have things that cannot be prevented. How are we going to educate society about benefit and risk? And this is a great friend of mine, Albert Jovel. He's a doctor. He's 47 years of age. He lives with metastatic cancer. I'm already in an unsafe world. A little more unsafeness doesn't bother me. So why can't we give this more to society? Because the system, because of the fear of litigation to our pharmaceutical companies and to our doctors. We have to tackle this. You cannot just let this system go on. We have to tackle it together with trust. How are we going to educate our society about the differences between side effects? They can often be tolerated and there's overall benefit to health. But what about adverse effects? Is it worth taking the medication if the cure is worse than the disease? I don't think a lot of people in society understand the differences between side effects and adverse effects. Transparency. We all talk about transparency, but you know, life's much more about trust than transparency. There's this guidance that's just gone through the EU at the moment that all the pharma companies, as soon as a drug is approved by the European Medicines Agency, they have to reveal all the documentation that was involved in bringing that medication to market. But that is written in a language that very few of us could understand. And so if we don't watch it, people will say, in the media perhaps, there goes the industry again, promising transparency, and yet we can understand very little. Because trust has been eroded there. So trust we have to build up with the pharmaceutical industry. What about these clinical trials? They're over 50 years of age now. They're not appropriate for our society. They exclude people who are over 65. They're excluded from the clinical trials. And yet, what have we just said about Europe? It is an aging population. So in fact, the clinical trials do not match the needs of our society. We need to get the patients involved with the clinical trials from day one, for them to tell the companies what really matters in the management of their illness, to be involved along the way. So perhaps when a causal signal is given off by a medication, the company can say to the patients involved, is this something you could live with? Or is it totally beyond you putting up with tolerance? And if it's beyond tolerance, a medication could be pulled or mediated or something to make it more tolerable for the patients. If you don't involve the patients, all medications will be slightly off what is truly needed by our society. Here are the facts about the clinical trials that are running. 30% of all clinical trials fail to recruit a single person. Did we know that in society? I don't think so. 85% of the clinical trials face delays due to limited participation. And fewer, I'm just giving from Parkinson's, the world I've originally come from, that 10% of the Parkinson's patients have ever been involved in trials when they're always desperately saying to the industry, we'd love to help in any way we can. And I've been on the board of the European Medicines Agency, and I see the trials coming up, and they're sent back because the exclusion criteria is so narrow that it has to go back to the company to widen them, which takes more time and more money. Patient-reported outcomes. We should be working much harder at this. And we've set up a project here with Oxford University. And we've got a consortia of 12 of the pharmaceutical companies. And what we're trying to do is to see what really matters to the patients. Now, two important people are on the steering group. One's Thomas Lerngren, who was the chief executive at the EMA, and the other is Professor Ken Patterson, a diabetologist who chaired the Payers, the Scottish consortia. And any ideas that doesn't appeal to either one of them will have to be sent back. So we're now looking at that. So for instance, if you'll allow me to demonstrate in the world of Parkinson's disease, at the moment, what helps a drug on its way is if it can be shown to improve length of stride of the patient and arm swing. Can I tell you, from the world of PD, that matters little. What matters more is the depression and anxiety, the ability to go to sleep, the management of pain, of their bowels, of their bladders, of sexual dysfunction. These are the things that we've got to get back. This is what matters to the patients. This helps them manage their lives more effectively, not length of stride or arm swing. These are our two challenges. They won't mind me saying this because they've been incredibly helpful in working with us, but Professor Guido Rassi from the Italian Medicines Agency, who's now the chief executive of the European Medicines Agency, and in my country, Sir Michael Rawlins, head of NICE, head of the Payers. And until we began to work with them closely, we saw both of them as sort of hurdles in the road, saying, you know, you will stop here. But once you begin to understand them and share their concerns, you begin to work considerably easier with them. I did say this when I intervened earlier, but, you know, we must do something about lifestyle. I'm not proud of this slide. I wish it wasn't mine from the United Kingdom, but there we are. We are aging, we are infertile, sexual health's the worst in Europe because of the teenage pregnancies, still taking drugs, still increasing our alcohol, and as you can see from the silhouette, getting fatter We're the fattest nation now in Europe. Not statistics that we're very proud of, but we could do something about a lot of that. For the patient groups, distress is not enough. When I look at my first job description, it was to tell everybody how terrible Parkinson's disease was. And that actually put me in competition with multiple sclerosis, with epilepsy. Is that the way to do business? Not at all. It's about working together. It's about making boats bigger, not pushing people out of boats. Advocacy groups have got to establish their credibility. They've got to collect evidence. They've got to contribute to discussions. And they've got to understand health technology assessments. To this end, we worked with Panos Kanavos at the London School of Economics to try to, in the nicest sense, educate the patients with the language that is needed to negotiate the access to medication, because it is a special language. And these are the courses we've held, and over 300 patient groups have gone through this. And they're seniors. They're either chief executives or policy advisors, and of course, sadly, the need to speak good English, because it is a complicated thing. But the spin-off has been marvellous. Italy has set up its own courses. I think Greece is going to do the same, and so on and so forth. It's beginning to spread, to educate the patient advocates to speak in this new language of cost and understanding and access. But now we're going to move into something else, because we've got to help our clinicians to understand that in this new world, it's not just about treating. It's about how you negotiate to get the medicines that you need to do the treating. I have a real battle with my own son over this. He's a nephrologist, and he's always saying to me, but I'm a doctor. And I'm saying, yes, you are a doctor, but a doctor in this 21st century, it's not just about treating. It's about how you make that argument with your government, with your Department of Health, that this medicine is needed and that it actually is highly cost effective to use it. They've got to be educated in that way. And Panos and I are setting this up and getting it underway next year. The patient's journey. Now look, patients are not a genus. They're all of us. It's just that some patients are further along the journey of life than others. And you know, if you look at your own lives, you've all been prepared for the journey, either with your parents, or perhaps your spiritual beliefs, your education, the books you read, the people you meet along the way. But I'd suggest to all of you, nobody prepares you for the moment when you get the diagnosis of a severe, life-threatening illness. Nobody prepared you for that. And when you talk to the patients, you say to them, what are you doing for Christmas? They'll say, Mary, I don't know. I'll have to see how I go. Because actually what they've lost is control over their lives. How can we help reinstate that control? It's by giving them information, by giving them a map for the life's journey. And that map, it's imperative that they have good clinicians to build on that doctor-patient relationship, because the doctor can explain about the illness. But they also need access to the people who make the medicines, which is the pharmaceutical industry, because they know what's in that medicine and the effect and the side effects. And we're being denied that. A lot of way across Europe is trying to keep us apart from the industry, which I think is very severe. It's a great shame. And you need other patient NGOs to walk the route with you, because they're fellow travellers and they can give you the odd tip on how to manage things better, because they're experienced. It's going to be a major challenge to all of our societies, whether you're in Athens or London, Brussels or Paris. How do we involve the patients? Because we do know from the research that an informed patient is a cost-effective patient. The doctors have done a great deal about widening how they talk to the patients, how they listen to the patients and really hear. But I don't think the patient groups have done enough to educate the patients about the questions to ask in that precious 12 minutes. Am I near the end? I'm nearly there. Thank you very much. So we need to work together because the patients have a voice. They need to be heard, they need to be listened to, and they need to be inclusive. Why? Because of this one coming up, the personalised medicine. This is going to be a massive challenge. Today, our doctors diagnose and treat based on symptoms and a subjective evaluation of what they're hearing. In the future, with personalised medicine, they're going to diagnose and treat based on biology and select the medication based on an objective evaluation of the benefit and risk for that individual patient. They're going to run the DNA through and see whether you will or will not respond to the medication. And unless society is truly understanding that, we will all have demonstrations on the streets because we will not understand why somebody with a 30% chance of recovering from a severe illness should not be treated while that person with 70% chance is. This is going to be a massive challenge to us. And so is this one, telemedicine and e-health, because the question is, when will it happen? It's here. It's here. And in my country, they're hoping to close a lot of the beds occupied by our elderly patients into a better setting in order to treat those who only need hospital access. Another big challenge. And perhaps this is the biggest one of all, and we've just touched on it in the introduction. Here is the regulatory procedure to get a medicine from the bench to the bedside. Millions of euros being spent in the preclinical, clinical development, 8 years. If the patients were involved, we could speed that. 2 years to negotiate with EMA. Then the payers say, too expensive. Another 2 years to negotiate HTA. Then finally on to our doctors, but they often say, let's wait. Let's give it about a year, that's the average, whatever ologist they are, to see that you can get a widen out into how many people are taking the drugs. So this is our challenge for all of our societies, rich or poor, east, west, north, south. It's going to be our ability to adapt and self-manage, to be able to participate in social activity despite all the limitations and challenges of aging. We want the Year of the Brain to be 2014. It's to protect the brain. We're not protecting our youngsters as much as we should. To preserve, to develop and nurture the most vital asset that a human being has, the brain. And why have we gone for 2014? Because it's the Greek presidency for the EU. We don't want to hear more about Euros. We'd like to hear about the Greeks' contribution to civilization. And you're followed by the Italians, who also contributed with a fine Renaissance. And the last slide, my hero, Darwin. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that's the most adaptable to change. Our society has changed, and at the moment we're not adapting very well. Thank you very much for having me.